Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very excited to be interviewing a very special space champion, Dr. Afshin Beheshti. Dr. Beheshti is a professor of surgery and computational and systems biology at the University of Pittsburgh, where he also serves as director of the Space Biomedicine program and associate director at the McGowan Institute of Regenerative Medicine. His work focuses on the effects of space environments on human health, developing countermeasures to mitigate the impacts of space radiation and microgravity. Prior to this, he contributed significantly to NASA Ames Research Center, working on projects like GeneLab and leading research on space biology and cancer. Dr. Beheshti is a key figure in the Space Omics and Medical Atlas project, collaborating with over 100 institutions worldwide to compile the largest ever collection of space biology research. His work has earned him prestigious awards, including the NASA Exceptional Scientific Achievement Medal. As you can see, Dr. Beheshti is a visionary leader, especially in aerospace medicine and medical research. So I was very excited to learn about his background, given my own personal affinity with aerospace medicine. And I'm excited to learn about his journey and his current endeavors. So welcome, Dr. Beheshti. Thank you so much for taking your time to share more about your work and your journey and inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, to kick off our conversation, I was mentioning before we started this interview that I originally came across your work through a LinkedIn post all about aerospace medicine, and I was super excited by some of the work that you were doing to bring it into new spaces, into universities. So to kick off our conversation, I wanted to start off by asking about some of your current work in aerospace medicine. So what does your current job entail, and how do you intertwine aerospace medicine into it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my background is actually in physics, so I've switched over from a long time ago physics to biology. So I'm a systems biologist, they call me. So I do a lot of wet lab work, but also computation work. So, the work currently I do is obviously related a lot to do with space biomedicine and aerospace medicine. And one of the things to do at Pittsburgh is to set up the whole space biomedicine center there because Pittsburgh wants to have be a hub of space biomedicine research because as obviously and are fully behind that the space industry is exploding industry that's happening. It's estimated to be like a $2 trillion industry in the next decade, right? So, and we're launching more and more things into space, and we want to make a human species survive in space. And this is the whole goal of space biomedicine and aerospace medicine to challenge, to make a countermeasure a safe kind of environment and figure out how it's safe for humans to survive in space in this environment that we were adapted to survive in. So a lot of the research I do is based around that. So, a lot of my research focuses on mitochondria, and mitochondria is like the powerhouse of the cell. So put it very simply, I'm sure you know more about it, but for the audience too, if they don't know, mitochondria is powerhouse of your cell, provides the majority of the energy your body produces in your cells. So, and then it has all these downstream impact of beneficial things when your mitochondria is working well. So that's one aspect of my research I work on. Another aspect of research is looking at microRNAs, and microRNAs are one type of RNA. There's many types of RNA, and one of them is this microRNA, which is a non-coding RNA. And non-coding RNAs are RNA that don't produce or translate into proteins. RNA usually translates to proteins. There's a whole slew of RNAs called non-coding RNAs which don't do that. MicroRNAs is one of them, which the Nobel Prize in medicine was on people who discovered microRNAs last year. So and microRNAs tend to be found in all over your body, and they tend to regulate hundreds to thousands of genes. They bind to the genes and inhibit them, and they're there for good functions and also for bad. When let's say there's insult of injury to your body, let's say for space or if you have cancer or any kind of diseases, microRNAs will be expressed and circulating throughout your body to inhibit things, let's say for that disease to progress. And in this case, for space flight. I think there's a microRNA signature which I've identified associated with it and could be potential biomarkers to indicate health risks of what might be associated with space and maybe potential targets to use. So that's one aspect, in addition to mitochondrial work that I do. So, basically incorporating a lot of these things. And it's not just the mitochondrial or microRNAs I work on space, but all aspects of space biomedicine I'm trying to cover. And of course, I collaborate with a lot of people. So then we work on more things. And then, I just don't do space biomedicine. I tend to tell people I get bored, so I don't want to do one thing. But also, a lot of things people do, it can be plug and play for many different fields. So, although I'm sure you get this question too, which is why spend all this time and effort researching space? It only affects, a fraction of people going there. But in reality, everything we do in space translates to Earth very nicely. So space, as I'm sure you're previous, because I've said, is an accelerated model for aging and diseases. So you don't age faster, but these diseases associated with aging makes you age faster, right? So that's where all the space, the harsh environment space causes all the things related with accelerated diseases like cardiovascular disease, brain issues, to go down the list, liver issues, just keep going down the list. So anything you discover to potentially have a thing to mitigate that damage cause, a pill or a kind of countermeasure, then that could easily be translated to the clinic too, to be helping people with a similar condition that happens in space. For example, kidney stones, that's a potential risk in space. So if you're able to solve that issue in that accelerated rate in space, then you could help people on Earth. But there's many other examples you could bring up. So then, I also work on cancer, as you mentioned. When COVID first started, a lot of computational people like me doing bioinformatics and omics type this big data, sequence data. We could apply a lot of our tools to a lot of different fields. So when COVID first started and formed this nonprofit called COVID-19 International Research Team. So that's still going. We're working on COVID issues. Long COVID in this case, as you probably know, a lot of people, unfortunately, when they got infected with the virus, develop long-term impact, chronic impact to get long COVID and things like that. And then also work on um, go down the list, many different subjects and because it's plug and play. But for space specifically, this is what I'm doing here at Pittsburgh is setting up this center using open science, which I'm all of an advocate of, and a large network of people to work with because I'm the whole concept of more the merrier because from any level, from high school undergrad graduates, to higher up to professors, postdocs, and directors. Typically, younger folks like yourself are the ones that are thinking outside the box and smarter than the older people because you're fresh and then you're not bound by all the rules that eventually piles in your brain that you're like you can't do that. But so I tend to do have my projects undergrads and graduate students and high school students from around the world that have time and want to help. And so yeah, we work with that kind of concept. And one thing that COVID taught us globally that it was a bad thing, but the one good thing that came out of it is that we saw that when people come together, scientists specifically come together, things rapidly get done and for the benefit of humanity, So that's the one th good lesson we learned from COVID that I think should be translated to all walks of science, and one of them being space biomedicine, since it's such a small field and it takes basically a village to do the work. I think the more the merrier approach is how we should go forward. So yeah, that's basically in a nutshell all the things, and hopefully at Pittsburgh, for the Space Biomedicine Center more and more people will come there because we're trying to make this a central kind of goal of research there where you can make future space doctors or future scientists that want to work in space and actually maybe go in space and pipette in a future rocket that facilitates scientists to go in space and do that.
That's so exciting. I mean, I have so many questions that just like came as you were talking. And I think that was one of the things I thought was super cool was that there are universities now actually more recognizing this field of space biomedicine and more importantly, wanting to invest in it. And you kind of briefly at the end touched a little bit about how you envision this program to run. But in the long run, maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, how do you see the space biomedicine program at Pittsburgh working? Is it mostly for graduate students or even undergrads getting involved? Having its own kind of major. What's your vision for the organization as of right now?
Yeah, so I mean, we're going to start with the easiest. You got to start in steps always. Unfortunately, I'm impatient. I want everything to start all at once, but of course, with as when you get involved with setting up programs, there's a lot of paperwork involved. So obviously, then you have to go step by step to make things easy. So we're going to start with a whole like PhD program first to set up, and then we're in the works of trying to create that, potentially doing like a joint PhD program with another institution. We'll see if that happens. But in Pittsburgh, at least do a PhD program to start with. One other thing initiative that I'm trying to do first is to do, when you're let's say as an undergrad or even as a graduate student, you can get schools offer certificates in special areas of subjects. And one of the things is, as you probably know, space biomedicine, aerospace medicine is taught, various schools teach it, but not everywhere teaches it, as you were saying. And the other part is that not me knowing so much about space, but I'm not experts in everything in space. And there's not one expert that knows everything about space biomedicine research, right? So the key is now what I'm trying to do is set up a global space biomedicine certificate program where um, we'll have a certificate first about space biomedicine that graduate students and medical fellows, pre-med students can get. And but the goal is to bring all the experts from around the world and have the experts actually teach the course. Nowadays, online courses are more and more being accepted. Pittsburgh has set up a whole online degree program that people can enroll with. So that's really great. And then, so at Pittsburgh, we want to use that as a resource, or I want to use that as a resource. I'm trying to set this up right now, where all the key experts from, doesn't matter, or Japan, Europe, and some of the European countries or South American countries or wherever you are, the key experts will actually teach the course universally across all universities, no matter which university you are. So then, we'll develop this program at Pitt in the process of, so when students enroll, they can enroll in the certificate and earn a certificate on their graduate degree saying in space biomedicine for now. So every other school so far that wants is interested to be part of this and participate, they will implement the blueprints or however this university wants to implement it into their program. They'll do that the same way. So let's say, for example, um, I'm just bringing a random example, not saying they're going to be involved, but let's say University of Colorado or Colorado State University says, "Oh, we're going to do this," and then they create their own certificate that works for their system, right? And then the students will get the credits through they're already registered in that school, and they'll get the credits to that. But the key thing is, when the course is being taught online, for example, I'll teach some courses, but that'll be transmitted around the world at the same time to all other universities, whether it's here in the U.S. at Pittsburgh or Colorado or Harvard or Oxford or somewhere else. It doesn't matter. And then same time, someone from, who has expertise, let's say in kidney biology out in somewhere in England, can actually then teach that 1 hour or 2 hour course structure, and they'll be transmitted to the students at Pittsburgh. So they'll be guest lectures in a sense. And that's the same structure you have. So then that's the idea where now, like every university, every student will have a kind of a unified education course. And like there's some space industry partners that are interested to be involved because they could teach about, for example, how to get biology into payloads and get that into space. And so that's one of the things that most students will never learn until they're actually in the field, but it's a good thing to learn about while you're learning about space biomedicine. So that's the first vision, and then ultimately then leads to setting up a whole space biomedicine program where a student can enroll at Pittsburgh and get a PhD in space biomedicine, or they could be a pre-med, student or a medical fellow, and they want to become a space doctor, right? So then they could get the proper courses to get their specialty there as a med student. And then eventually get undergrads program set up once we get the PhD program, because the PhD program is going to take a long time, or maybe not necessarily a long time, but might take a while to set up and a lot of work. And once that's set up, then you have the foundation to set up the undergrad. But in the meantime, as you probably know, a lot of the undergrad classes, the foundation classes, anything you really take as an undergrad can apply to space. You might not get the space specific, biomedicine thing, but if you take biology courses, all the biology that changes will happen in space. So you have that foundation. Then you go to graduate school to get the PhD. Then you learn how that fundamental biology will change in space. That'd be the graduate course. Already in Pittsburgh, we have also this thing called Pitt Space Initiative, where there's this whole space engineering folks that work on things related with circuitry or robots and things like that, right? For space travel. And there's a whole space science group that there's from physicists, chemists, geologists that work on that angle of space. And that's being set up. That's already set up. So Pitt Space that has two other pillars there, and me is space biomedicine. And I know the space engineering folks at Pittsburgh already have undergrad courses for space engineering. So that's something, if people were interested in going to engineering instead of biomedicine, there's already something for undergrads there at Pittsburgh. So that's really nice. And then eventually, I think the other side, the space science, there's already obviously astrophysics type courses, but things that could be more geared for, let's say, geology in space, things like that will be eventually. But specifically for what I know, the space biomedicine is the vision to be, and he said a 20, 30-year vision is, yeah, then actually make it a hub for space biomedicine education could be Pittsburgh, where we do use the key experts from around the world, bring them in, they help teach the courses as guest lecturers. So we truly are getting the actual knowledge that's been given to the experts, being transferred to the students. And then from there, you also then obviously develop notch research because they'll have obviously graduate students need to be in a lab, part of their dissertation to get their PhD, right? So you need the research to mirror the education, and this is the part where we're already doing. People are trying to apply for funds to get, and obviously I do a lot of work already there related to space biomedicine, but that would foster more and more research and opportunities for us to actually send things to space or do simulate experiments on Earth and things like that. So.
Incredible. I'm very excited for this program. I think it's really, once it really comes to life and more institutions start to see the value and collaborate in growing this space biomedicine program, I think it'll really encourage more students to learn about it, but take it more seriously and realize that there are opportunities for them in this field and in the industry. And as you were mentioning, especially with the payloads part, I mean, I know there are a lot of commercial space stations right now trying to be built to replace the International Space Station, and that'll open up so many doors for more researchers to go to space as opposed to just a select few astronauts. So it's a very exciting future, and I think that, hearing about this program, it's just, I can't wait to see more schools do it as well, and as well as to see the impact of this. And I was curious about your background as well, because I was mentioning in your introduction that you're a professor in surgery as well. And I'm curious, is there a connection between that as well as your work in space biomedicine? And I ask that because I'm very interested in 3D printing artificial tissues or organs and the space of, how you can possibly create personalized tissues and organs. So I know surgery and transplants is a big topic for the future. And so I'm just curious if there is a connection right now you're interested in going into, or maybe just something about that. Maybe is there a connection with what you're doing?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, so at Pittsburgh, as I said, I do a lot of different things. So one of my appointments is in the Department of Surgery, and there, for example, I'm working on ways of, trauma is a big thing that's for Department of Surgery, and as you probably know, a lot of the trauma is maybe one of the top causes of death, in society, and whether that's, getting in a car accident or as I've been learning more and more is like, usually for people who are males specifically in the age of 20s to 40s, trauma is usually associated with them doing stupid things after getting drunk. Like, but or not even getting drunk. Like you climb the ladder, like, when you're younger, you're more gung-ho to do things. So falling off a ladder is one of the big things in trauma, because you don't feel out that fear as you grow older. Wait, maybe I shouldn't do this. But other things like a lot of traumas involve the late night bad decisions people make. Getting hit by something, or you fall and trip, or you hit your head something. Sometimes get in fights. So trauma is one of those things that is a in the Department of Surgery at Pittsburgh is a big central part of the research there. And as you might know, like some people, for example, when they get in an accident, whatever the accident is, sometimes the helicopter brings them over to the hospital. For some people, once they get off the helicopter ride, they're fine. They just get up. I'm okay. I'll walk away. So some people know that first 24 hours they're a bad responder, and they might die from that trauma. So, why is that? Why do some people having that same exact trauma recover perfectly, and why does some people have the poorest response to even lead to them potentially dying? So, that's one of the key issues, of trauma, trying to solve why some responders are better than others. And then, of course, there's a bunch of other things, of course, in the Department of Surgery, as you mentioned, transplants is again, trauma thing, and doing organ transplants and other factors like that. So that's one of the aspects I'm working on, and a lot of things is related with, really with the computational aspect, with dealing with the big data, cohort sequencing data. So that's what I would be dealing with. Now, related to space, you could think space is a slow churning trauma to your body, right? Because of the space radiation and the microgravity impact. It is a trauma, but it's not like the severe impact, because then usually when you look at, let's say, biological changes from sequence data and trauma, usually it's, either things are really blaringly high that changes factors to things are not. So it's obvious changes are there. It's not like space. Sometimes there's more subtle things that happen over time. So that's one aspect, how to, let's say in space, let's say for trauma, how do we learn from there? The things that happen there can be applied to like the slower trauma of impact in space. Now, let's say we think about future long-term missions going to Mars, right? That's about a round trip. If you don't take a pit stop in Mars and land, it's about a year, right? To go a year and a half to go there and come back, just to go around. So let's say something happens to people when they're in that year trip. Obviously, they can't go to your emergency room, right? or even now in ISS, there's protocols to bring people back in 24 hours if there's some severe emergency happening, right? So, how do we, let's say, do something like a surgery, because obviously that's very complicated to do in space, or do uh if there has to be, let's say someone has an appendix and you need appendicitis, right? How do you do that? So I think the lessons learned from the Department of Surgical type research like that could maybe apply to space. I'm not personally doing any of that yet. It's more focused on the trauma side, but there are other people I'm aware of that are investigating, not at Pittsburgh, but or maybe at Pittsburgh too, but around the world that are investigating like how would you do procedures like that, emergency procedures in astronauts in these deep space missions, or even if you're on the moon, it takes 3 days to come back. 3 days might kill an astronaut if they needed that emergency procedure, like an appendicitis, or as a simple example that easily curable on Earth. You go at 20 minutes, you take it out, you go home, right? But there in space, that could be life and death if they don't know how to take care of that, and if someone has an appendix in space, so. Um, so that's sort of what my Department of Surgery appointment is more working on other aspects other than space, but you can easily relate things back to space, as I just mentioned, with a lot of the work we do, and vice versa. The things that space can also, lessons learned can also be applied to trauma related incidents or Department of Surgery incidents.
Yeah, I was just curious about that connection, but also it's very cool to hear about how there are people already investigating that. I assume there were, but it's just there's so many questions we need to solve if we want to send humans to a different planet or for a prolonged period of time up in space without, on ground support. It's just so many questions to answer. I remember when I did an internship at NASA GeneLab, and that was my first exposure to space biology, and I was just blown away with how much data was being collected to try to understand what was happening to our bodies in microgravity. And I feel like we haven't even scratched the surface in understanding what really happens and what are those long-term consequences. So it'll be interesting as we continue to send more humans to space and observe some of those, long-term differences in what happens to our bodies. And so, I mean, I'm so curious to learn about your journey of getting into this space because although it's been there for a while, I feel like it's still relatively a new field, even for this day and age. Like a lot of people don't know about it. My teachers, counselors, whenever I mention I'm interested in this field, they kind of like look at me like, is it a real career? So I'm curious about your own journey getting into this field. What did you have like an aha moment that inspired you to go into medicine and then specifically try to kind of gear and kind of find your way into aerospace medicine? Did you have an aha moment for space and medicine separately? I'm curious, what was your story into getting into this field?
Yeah, yeah, sure. To back up for your counselors or teachers, if they ever have space things, to tell them to talk to me. And there's definitely a future you could tell them in space and space medicine and engineering or any of that stuff. So, since it is a very, as you know, is a very fast growing field. So if any of them say that, just point them to the many things we talk about now, or haven't even contemplated.
Definitely.
But yeah, for my career path, it's not hasn't been a straightforward career path as most people have. Like a lot of times people go to undergrad, graduate school, they work on some project, and that graduate school project translates to what they eventually do as a postdoc in academics, and then eventually do what they write grants about and get to become a principal investigator, professor. Um, so for me, as I said, my background as an undergrad, I did high energy physics, something completely different, right, than everything we're talking about. It could loosely relate to space because high energy physics, the fundamental questions that and all of it that wants to answer is why is there mass? Because we don't know why we have mass, and then also the fundamental building blocks of the universe. That's so it has loose ties to space. But as a graduate school, I just kind of switched to biophysics. I put it in quotes because as a physicist, I didn't care about, the AG, the nucleotide bases of the DNA, right? I was like, well, what's that? It doesn't matter. So as a physicist, we kind of looked at how DNA moves through objects, modeled things, how they moved, let's say coils and stretches. But then after I was, towards the end of my PhD, I was thinking, well, I want to next step something that more human relevant, clinical relevance, I wanted. So one of the things as a physicist, there's this one posting next to my advisor's door. I always say the physicists are a jack of all trades. We could do like electrical engineering, not as good. We could do this, not as good, but we could basically do most things because we have the mathematical and computational skills. But also the physics kind of teaches you more analytical things. But I think anyone in graduate school nowadays can be the same way. They could. I mean, biology doesn't teach you as much math as, let's say, math or physics, but or computer coding. But I think now with all the tools out there to learn, let's say, R programming for bioinformatics. A lot of biologists are getting into that fairly easily, and I think it's much easier than it was, let's say, back a couple of decades ago. So that's when I switched over to biology, and then there actually my first postdoc I did because of the techniques I knew that this one lab in Boston area, the Forsyth Institute, which works on oral microbi or oral health issues, so I was working on an oral microbiome project. So that was one thing I got nothing to do with space. And then so eventually after that postdoc, I switched over to another postdoc to work on in this lab, again in the Boston area. It was St. Elizabeth's Hospital is a nonprofit hospital, which was associated at the time with Tufts University. So there, I joined the lab that the director, she was working on. She's a physicist herself, but she was working on she started a cancer systems biology institute, so I was working on cancer, but she also had a bunch of NASA grants, a big NASA grant. So that's how I got involved in the space thing. So kind of just in there, I was like, oh, this is, and then so a lot of the projects we're doing, not only cancer research, but looking at say cancer risk related with space flight. So that's how I started getting into space because through that work, not only doing the cancer work, but on other things, but also learning about the space stuff. And it's fun, to do all these different types of work. And space is always fun too. There's a lot of different, you do unique type research that you might not do standard wise in the lab sitting to do it because you have to go special places to just simulate space radiation and things like that. And then eventually, I ended up at Tufts Medical Center for a short stint working on cancer stuff where again I was trying to apply for grants for space related research, continue that work, and then one of my colleagues called me up saying, "Want to join NASA Ames Research Center to help with that GeneLab project that you said you were briefly working with over the summer interning." So that was where I joined NASA Ames Research Center in the Bay Area to first help kind of set up that platform. My colleague was setting up as a project manager, and then eventually while I was there, then obviously being immersed in a place that constantly works on space, right? So that's where I learned a lot more, and then got my own grants to work on from NASA to work on specific questions I wanted to work on, like microRNAs and mitochondria related work. And then, eventually now I'm in Pittsburgh 8 years later after I was at NASA Ames. So, um, that sort of thing. It wasn't really, some people have that aha moment. This is what I want to do. But for me, it's more the job, the circumstances and the weaving, taking it and then keeping up what was fun for me to do because you shouldn't have a job that you don't like. I mean, a lot of people have jobs that they don't like, but I've always said, well, a lot of people say this too. This is a common phrase. If love your job, you never work a day in your life, right? That common phrase that people use. So that's sort of the same idea that I've had my the job life pattern where the job I do is fun. Sure, there's always admin issues and things that might get in the way that get boring once in a while, but overall, I go to work like playing all day basically because you're playing with data or you're playing with the collaborators to say, hey, how do we think about ideas to work together? And then you write your grant, and grants are sometimes not as fun to write, but eventually, because you're writing, you're thinking about the project. So, those are fun things to do. And sometimes you get the grant, sometimes you don't, and you push forward. So that's how, never had that aha moment, but I think it's more the job career path, the intertwining things. And it just took me to where I am. And granted, probably my interests guided me that way, right? If I was interested in that, I'll be going somewhere completely different, but my interests would keep guiding me then. Unfortunately, opportunities came, that helped me to get where I am now.
It's amazing. Yeah, and I think that's a very valid story that so many people have shared. Like it's sometimes you don't have that aha moment growing up where it's just it never crosses your mind. But then there are certain opportunities that come your way and you just follow it and everything just kind of works out and you're like, oh, maybe this is like something I should really focus on. And it just, goes that way. And I think a lot of people can relate to that story. And I think what you mentioned earlier about also transferring skills into space. You probably know this better than anyone. Like space is so diverse in terms of the skills it requires. It needs literally everyone. And so when you bring in all of these unique skills from fields that are not space related, but you can always connect it some way back into the industry. That's why I think it's more rapidly growing, more investments, more, commercial focus on it. So there'll be more projects. So we
Right.
definitely need as many people as we can with different skills to contribute. And in this journey of yours, did you have any obstacles? Because when someone looks at your profile, I'm sure they're like, oh, he's like a genius. He like did physics, like very smart, which you are. But it's so easy to just think that, you yourself as a college student or high school student would not be able to be like this person growing up. And we sometimes tend to lose like their own journey. So I'm curious, did you have any obstacles in your journey, whether it be as a student or even in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I was lucky. In school, I never had too many obstacles, but I know, like, I went to physics, and then as a high school student, I was interested in physics. I like remember freshman year in high school, I was like, oh, I like physics. When you start taking some of the more, higher science classes, and then eventually taking physics, physics came easy for me. So, I was in AP Physics, and then like towards the last semester, one of my and it helps to have teachers who are encouraging you always, right? Let's say if somewhere you didn't have teachers, wasn't encouraging it too much, then some people have to overcome that. That's always a challenge. But luckily in my school, high school had good teachers there. Then that's why teachers are great, and the education department should be kind of funding, slight politics, but anyway. But yeah, so that was key, So, for example, my physics professor in high school, he towards the last semester, he's like, "Well, you're obviously doing well here. Do you want to look at this college undergrad textbook and kind of do on your own with me, study high school college physics?" And I was like, "Sure." So that helped. And then, yeah, I mean, as a undergrad in sure you have the regular hard classes and stuff, but as long as you study, sit down, like there's no really obstacles there either. To get by. In graduate school, of course, you have your various obstacles where you have to take your comprehensive exams to pass and qualify for your PhD. Before you get to grad school, you got your GREs, right? Some schools nowadays, I'm not a big component or proponent for standardized testing. So, and I heard nowadays some schools are kind of not relying so much on the GRE, which is good, I think, because I think GREs don't really capture some students' potentials that is there that they might not do well in standardized tests, but they're very smart people and they could actually, if you look at what's on, what people recommend and what they've done, I think that's more important. But I think that's maybe an obstacle that some students might face in general these days or back when I was in school. So, but yeah, graduate school is the regular hurdles, just basically, taking your qualifying your exams to qualify your PhD. Of course, there's always whether in biology, physics, or chemistry, everyone has to do it. And of course, those are hard exams. And if you might have a couple of tries, there's always, places that you might have to take. Like for example, my one of my qualifying exams, you had like two or three tries to do it. The first time I didn't get it, so I was like, oh, I was close, but then the second time I passed, so it was good. So not everyone passes the first time, which is which is the lesson learned. But I think the major obstacles, like I think when you're a student or a postdoc, it's probably some of the best times to do research because you don't have to worry about funding, because you're working in a person's lab, and that's the job of the professor or the PI to bring in the funds to make sure people like you and other folks and the younger people in the lab can actually do the research and not worry about that. So as a postdoc, you don't really have too many hurdles other than think how you can move up the ladder, right? So that's the main hurdle there. But as a professor going up, I think the main hurdles have been funding, right? So when you're applying, and this is a constant battle, no matter where you get in your career, whether you're starting up as an assistant professor, junior faculty to more senior, that's always the case funding because you get funding from, let's say NASA grants or NIH grants or other things as, they're competitive. Obviously, a lot of people go for them and the lucky few get them. Like I've been lucky enough to get some grants, but then those grants run out, so you have to apply again. So you have to apply again. So sometimes there've been times where the obstacles would be like, you're getting close that if you don't get this funding, how am I going to cover my research? How am I going to cover my salary? How am I going to cover funds and things like that? So that's the main hurdle, I think. Once you get to that level, it takes a while. Like some not academics is not for everyone to what, and so you have to be somewhat have a masochistic philosophy because it is kind of, you constantly apply for grants and then if you don't get them, it's stressful, sometimes. So that's part of academics, but it's rewarding at the same time because when you're academics, this is your career and you're sort of you are your own boss. Basically when let's say a university hires you in academics and say, all right, you're here as an assistant professor, your junior faculty, here's the keys to your lab. Good luck. Come back when you have some money. And basically, they give you a startup and help you along on the way, but it's sort of like a startup company you're doing. That's how academics, like you could think of it that way, because it truly is. You have to be thinking of, okay, now I have to hire people to work, graduate students, postdocs, and then how do I manage the money? How do I think of getting more money? Whether it's from industry, whether it's from philanthropists, whether it's from actual grants, and government grants. So, that's sort of the hurdles that you have to get over. And some people, it's not for them. They want to go, let's say you get a PhD or an undergrad degree and you want to go to industry. There's a lot of industry jobs. It's a different path. Not one path is better than the other. It's just the person has to decide what's good for them. And for example, now as you mentioned, the space industry, there's so many space companies, as you know, out there, like Axiom Space, Vast. And Vast is one of the ones next year launching the first commercial, space station ever. I know Axiom's building theirs up there, but Vast is the first one to do it. So, there's just name two, but there's Virgin Galactic. You go down the list, and I'm sure you can name more of them than me. There's hundreds of them out there now. And that's the part where, let's say, if you got a PhD in space biomedicine or related field, genetics or something, biology, and you did space research on the PI, yeah, you can easily hop over to one of those companies too. So, and again, industry has its own hurdles, which I'm not as familiar with since I haven't been in this working for industry, but I know of some hurdles because you have to always hit the milestones of the company. This company has to survive after all, make the money. And then government, being NASA the past 8 years, so working for this contract company within NASA, that has its own hurdles too, because there's different rules and restrictions in the government. Let's say even places like NASA, as opposed to academics. Sometimes in academics you have more freedom than other places do. So, um, yeah, and overall, I think for me, I haven't had too many hurdles. I mean, knock on wood, but but I think the main hurdles is once you get to the point of trying to be an independent researcher is the funding and there's sometimes, yeah, where you're have to basically look at between the couch cushions for funds, hoping you get some, or you beg and beg for money and borrow money or whatever you need to do in the science terms, right? Because sometimes you do have to be a good salesperson, be like, oh, if I get these funds, I could do this. So yeah, it is a challenge there, but once you get moving, and you start doing research, good research, that usually attracts more money to and funds. And the more data you get, then the more you show how well you're doing, then you can apply, be more qualified to apply for more grants, and that's how the cycle eventually should be in academics. You see people go.
Got it. Yeah, I wasn't actually too aware of like the dynamics of like academia versus industry. I knew there was obviously a huge difference in terms of like goals, but it was really nice to hear your own perspective on kind of how it was like to go from more of like a student to a postdoc to being a professor, because I'm sure the transition is not easy and it's not something everyone prepares you for. So I
Right.
think it's a very good insight to keep in mind as we kind of progress into those different stages of our life. And so now that we're able to learn a little bit about your journey as well as your research, my last and final question for you, which I ask everyone who comes onto this podcast, which is if you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that advice be? It could be like career related, general life advice, just anything, something you wish you knew when you were maybe in college or right out of college, just a piece of advice you would share.
That's a good one. I gotta think about this one. Maybe take more than one biology course. I only took one biology course, but I'm fine. That I don't need to know biology because I read and learned that, and I surrounded myself with smart biologists, so that's always good. The feedback. One bit of advice. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it's a tough question, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I mean, one bit of advice which I use now, which I think it could have helped sooner too, is work with a large network of people. I mean, and I do that now, and I've always had been, pretty social and stuff, but within the career, like in graduate school, maybe, work more with, and of course, when you're a graduate student or a postdoc, you're working under someone, so it's harder to branch out, but as long as you're open with your advisors, yeah, work with lots of people around the world. Get to know lots of people around the world. These days are even easier than back when I was there because you have the internet. And so I mean back in the 90s we had the internet, but it didn't have all the platforms like Zoom like this, to actually meet people and work with people. So it's a lot easier now to do that. I think that's the key, be open to anything and also be open to everybody, accept everybody and be open to everybody and help. That's the way for, let's say, science to really translate and move forward rapidly at any level, undergrad, graduate student, and higher.
I definitely will take that advice. I know for me, like, using LinkedIn or Zoom has been like opening so many doors. And I always tell everyone that I talk to, any student, any high school student who wants to like find a mentor or get into the field or break through, and they're kind of like, how do I even get that first opportunity? I'm like, use LinkedIn or, build a network, have a community. You'd be surprised how many people, especially in the space sector, I feel like people are really passionate about what they're doing and they just love it so much that they want to share their passion with other people. And so, I definitely concur with your advice. And it's something, although you have to step a little bit out of your comfort zone, especially if you're more of an introvert, it definitely will serve you in the long run. And so I know I'll definitely take that advice. And I'm sure everyone who's listening, regardless of what stage of their career they're in, should really take that advice in and implement it in their own life. So,
And a lot of people in science are pretty accepting too. So people who are introverts, yeah, there's a lot of introverts in science, and people know that, but that's okay. There's I think science is probably one of those fields that uh, maybe I'm in most things they're more accepting of any of people's backgrounds and people who you are. Now they might not be accepting of all ideas that people have, but that depends on the person. But it doesn't no matter where you're from, your background, your philosophy, I think science, especially in space, it's that's pretty well accepted. That anyone from all walks of life can be interspace science, space biomedicine.
definitely. Yeah. So we'll definitely carry your advice with us. And so thank you so much for doing this interview today. I had a blast speaking with you. There are not a lot of aerospace medicine professionals that I get to talk to a lot. So it's very cool when I do get to meet someone and learn about their specific research. So thank you so much for doing this interview.
Yeah, thanks for having me.